having like the algae in the refugium also creates a space for like microfauna, like your copepods to populate and stuff. Like I guarantee you that thing of Chaeto, I believe that's Chaeto, and that sump that's growing. It's probably loaded with pods, I'm assuming, because it's just such a area for them to reproduce and grow. And it's a good safe haven for them.
What's up, Reef Fanatics? In today's episode, we're talking all about macroalgae, and I have 5 ways they benefit your tank and how they function within a saltwater aquarium. And as always, I am joined today by Mr. Levi Peterson, the oddball reefer.
What's going on? I'm doing good.
Awesome. So today, we're talking about macroalgae. What is it about macroalgae that makes it such a hot topic? What are some of the things that we need to know about macroalgae, and where would you like to start?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we start out with like what a lot of people in the hobby actually know macroalgae and what they know it's used for specifically. And I think it all started out like I don't know, probably 10 or so years ago. I mean, macroalgae before then wasn't even really a thing until you started getting like refugiums and stuff. A lot of it started with like Julian Sprung kind of talking about growing algae in a sump, removing nutrients and all that sort of stuff. And once you started seeing all these like different types of filters coming out, such as like your refugiums, people started putting things in there that are going to help remove nutrients like algae. So it all typically starts with you like having a set space in your sump that's kind of sectioned off where you can keep algae and kind of keep a light on it just to keep algae growing, because as the algae grows, it's going to absorb a lot of nutrients. So I think that's what a lot of people, kind of when they say macroalgae or someone says macroalgae, I think that's kind of what they think of. But there's other uses for it as well. So we'll get into that a little later.
Yeah, absolutely. So jumping into it, we're talking macroalgae, the function in saltwater aquariums, and you hit right on the very first point that we're going to talk about is nutrient export. And that's very familiar to people now in the hobby because it's been around, like you said, for a while. And yeah, nutrient export. So the macroalgae, usually keep it in a sump like this, like you were talking about. It absorbs the nitrates and the phosphates, which help control like the nuisance algae in your tank, but it also grows the macroalgae. But overall, it improves your water quality.
Yeah.
And so you can put it into a sump here, or there's also the like turf scrubbers that grow different algae too. So it's just different ways of using algae to better your water quality, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more thing I'll mention real quick. It's also like with how that picture was, having like the algae in the refugium also creates a space for like microfauna, like your copepods to populate and stuff. Like I guarantee you that thing of Chaeto, I believe that's Chaeto, and that sump that's growing. It's probably loaded with pods, I'm assuming, because it's just such a area for them to reproduce and grow. And it's a good safe haven for them, especially if you're like keeping like your more finicky fish like your mandarins and stuff. It's always nice to have that option, to go down there. There's always pods in there. Take a little bit up and shake it out and get the pods out to feed those more finicky fish. So I think that's always really cool. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is my sump right here, and dude, it's loaded with amphipods and copepods and everything in there. But yeah, the next point is number 2 is oxygenation. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about through photosynthesis, they're releasing oxygen into the water. It benefits the fish, the inverts. And this is a picture of the 10-gallon tank, and you see some macroalgae in there as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so that's another benefit, is that it's adding oxygen to your water, which overall improving the water quality, improving that for your fish. So it's benefiting that.
Definitely.
So those are 2 really big ways that it helps your aquarium. And we're kind of flying through these, but let's take a pause real quick and jump into a scientific segment. I know that Levi always brings something really cool for us to learn about. What do you got for us today?
Yeah, today's a different one, and I think it's pretty cool. It's also something that people might mistake for something that it's not. And I used to think the same way when I first saw this. But it's the Brazilian basilet or the Brazilian grama. So this may look like just a typical royal grama to you, but if you put them side by side, there's an obvious difference. And if you look close at this, you can kind of see like a more bluish hue instead of a solid purple. And they also just specifically come from like down in the Southern Caribbean near Brazil, giving it its name. So it's a super cool fish. Biota actually captive breeds these now, so I'm hoping to get my hands on one soon. Yeah, just something different. And I mean, like I said, it you may think it's a royal grama just looking at it, but if you put them side by side, there's a definite difference.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, in this photo, you can tell it's a lot more bluish hue to it,
Yep.
which makes it different as well. Um, and the and its fins up there, the dot on its fin. So
Yeah.
that is really cool. So is it similar to, well, of course it's the same type of fish like a royal grama. Is it
Yeah, it's
similar?
in the same genus.
Yeah,
And they live similarly in the wild. They act about the same. But from my research that I've done on these specifically, they tend to be a little more aggressive than your typical royal grama, and they're
yeah,
also harder to come by because they come from Brazil and they're just hard to get. So they're going to be a little more expensive. But it's still something if you're looking for a unique like basilet to add to your tank that may not be as common or something or just something different, then this is a cool one to add. So
yeah, super cool. So yeah, if you like the royal grama and you want something a little bit more unique, check out biota captive bred ones, or maybe you'll find one mixed in a tank in your local fish store. You never
you
know.
never
Look
know.
for that bluish color there. So jumping right back into macroalgae, this brings us to number 3, which you kind of hit on: habitat and a food source. So you talked about copepods being
Yep.
plentiful within macroalgae, within that ball of chaetomorpha, um, and then amphipods, of course. And it
Absolutely.
just provides a safe haven
Yeah.
for those animals, for them to
Absolutely.
thrive. And then they can get, if it's in a sump, they can get pumped right back in the tank,
Yep.
feed fish, like you said, the mandarins, and just
Yeah.
have a food source constantly cycling your tank, which is super cool.
Definitely.
Um,
Yeah. And
but
another thing, it's like it's a food source that mentioned on there. Like you got your typical like a lot of people know of your sea lettuce macroalgae that can be used to feed your fish, and I've even
Mhm.
seen people like put like if they got a bunch of Chaeto growing in there something that's just overgrowing. I've seen people throw that on a clip and their tanks will eat it. So I mean, it's pretty much a consistent and constant food source, especially if it's growing really rapidly in your sump. And it's healthy. It's straight up macroalgae, and that's what they eat in the wild. So I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also not only safe haven for like copepods and stuff like that, like the smaller critters. It's also used in tanks like for seahorses,
Definitely, yeah,
because seahorses, they move a little bit slower. They also like attach their tails onto it and hang out, and um, it's used for that reason as well.
yeah. And I
So
mean, realistically, like when I see seahorses out in the wild, a lot of the times you'll see them kind of hanging out in seagrass or macroalgae beds, just kind of gripping and hanging out of the macroalgae. And macroalgae is also like for like seahorses specifically, it's
mhm,
relatively easy because certain corals don't tend to like being clinged onto, and you can't really keep many corals with seahorses because they'll sting the seahorses and because these seahorses are very sensitive. So macroalgae is a good way to add some different colors because there's a bunch of different species which we'll get into later,
yeah.
and also just something easy for them that's easy to keep for them to hold on to.
And I feel like we're kind of flying through these a little bit. So let's do a little recap. So if someone's new to the hobby and they're listening to this, or someone uh, dipping their feet into the waters of macroalgae, number 1, talked about nutrient export, how it
Yeah.
absorbs the nitrates and phosphates, helps with water quality. Number 2 was oxygenation. So through photosynthesis, they release oxygen into the water, and then habitat and food source. So they provide the shelter for smaller organisms.
Absolutely.
Um, but that it also helps with, right here, number 4, pH stabilization. So if
Yeah.
you're having problems with pH, this is one way to kind of help that in your tank, because pH is linked to CO2, and it's going to
Yep.
remove that CO2 out of the system.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, when I had my oh goodness, it's gonna turf scrubber, my algae scrubber, I would always run it at the opposite, like the lights specifically. I'd run them opposite of what my tank lights were at. That
Yes.
way, my pH would stay more stable throughout the night. Because as the algae's growing and photosynthesizing, it's soaking up that CO2, hence raising your pH. So that's a good way to kind of run your refugium is the opposite schedule of your light. That way,
Mhm.
your pH is more stable and it doesn't drop so much during the night.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Like, make sure you're running opposite schedule so that
Mhm.
your pH is pretty stable throughout. Now, what do you recommend for where to put your refugium? Or do you put the refugium before, like a protein skimmer, or do you run the skimmer
So
first and
I
then
would
your refugium?
probably so the way my sump is, it has a sock chamber. It has like an area that you can put like your heater and then your skimmer, and then it has the refugium, and then there's like a sponge after the refugium before it goes to your return.
Return. Yeah.
So I like it the way that specifically is because I mean sometimes with your Chaeto, with how thin it is, it breaks up into little pieces sometimes, and they go over into the like sponge, and that's why that sponge is there, so it kind of keeps the things from getting into your return.
Hmm.
So I'd probably, if I was building a sump or trying to like make a custom sump, I'd want to put it after the skimmer. That way, all those little particles of algae aren't getting into your skimmer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And my sump is built similar with the sock chamber, and then I got the skimmer, then a refugium, and it's
Yep.
got the sponge to the return. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but I feel like you can run it either way. I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think if you look on like the method within Triton, I think they have the refugium first
Okay.
and then the skimmer. Um, but I remember when I was first, like years ago, first getting into setting up a refugium, there was talk about, well, if you have your refugium first, all those copepods and ambipods are just going to get sucked into the skimmer or something, and they're not going to make it through to the return.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that's the case. I think either
No.
way, it's fine. But the way I have mine set up, the skimmer is first, so that
Yep.
way there is more time for like the copepods to thrive and hang out, and
Yeah.
they're safe and everything,
Yep.
so they can get sucked up in there. But I think either way, however you set it up, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
yeah,
Everyone has their different preferences, so I mean, do it the way
for
you want to
sure,
do it. So
absolutely. So pH stabilization there, keeping your pH stable
yeah.
throughout the night and the day. And then here's the fun one is the
Yes.
aesthetic appeal of the algae, because it moves beyond just being in the sump, right?
Absolutely.
There's so many amazing aquariums out there in saltwater tanks that the algae is not in a sump. It's more decorative, which we see that on Instagram. Tiger Boy H2O, he's like the main guy on
Yeah.
Instagram with these macroalgae tanks.
Yeah. I mean, if you've seen a macroalgae tank on Instagram, it was probably one of his. In all honesty, he's
Absolutely.
got multiple macroalgae displays, and they all look immaculate. Like it's insane. It's crazy. Like just the way he like scapes it and the way that it grows, and it looks beautiful. I mean, he does a great job. He's inspired me when I had my macroalgae tank up and running. And it's always cool because people don't realize this. I mean, there's only a few like algae that are like ready like to go, like that are aquaculture and in the hobby
Mhm.
specifically. But there are so many different species of algae out there that make their way in, even from like overseas, that just kind of hitchhike on frags or coral colonies, um, and vice versa. There's just so many different species of algae that you can kind of mess with and play with. Some aren't really, going to be able to be used for like what we were talking about earlier, like refugium and stuff. Especially a lot of the ones you see in this tank, you can't really use for refugiums. And I'll touch
Yeah.
on that a little more later, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, macroalgae tanks are really fun. They're really unique. And there's another one. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, and I mean the only thing you'd probably have to watch out for, I guess, if you um, in a sump as well, is you don't want to get one that's going to go sexual on you and just
Yep. Yeah.
start like sending things out and growing and overtaking
Yeah.
things like Callirpa
Yep. So
do
yeah,
that.
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
I personally would never recommend using a Callirpa species in your sump,
no.
and you even got to be careful when you're keeping it in your system. Because I've just a lot of they'll decide to just go sexual randomly. Like they'll grow really rapidly, and when they go sexual, like your tanks and get all clouded up because they literally like their whole entire body, like the whole algae, just turns white. It turns pure white. It releases a bunch of gunk into the water, and it gets bad. So you gotta
Yes.
be really careful when you're keeping Callirpa.
Yeah, I had a tiny mason jar tank. I think it was a 1 gallon tank
Yeah,
a few years ago, and I had put Callirpa in there, and that stuff just took off. I'm trying to look for a photo of it right now, but it like overgrew that mason jar like
yeah,
crazy.
nice.
Um, but yeah, while I'm looking at that, we'll move on to the next thing. Um, but yeah, if you want to talk about different types of macroalgae that you can use in a sump, some that
Yeah,
you would recommend, or just some that you want to educate us on,
yeah,
jump into that.
yeah. So I believe we got a few photos here. We can talk about a couple that are pretty common in the hobby, like the pom algae.
Yes.
So Top Shelf and a few other different companies grow this. It's aquacultured. It's pest free. It's great stuff. Pom algae is really good. The only thing I'd recommend with this, and even Chaeto, I mean, you don't have to with Chaeto, but this specifically, a lot of people like to tumble in their aquarium. So you're going to want to get some kind of flow in your refugium to be able to kind of create like a sideways whirlpool just to keep that algae tumbling so it can grow. That way, the whole entire side, like every single angle, is getting light. That way, that whole ball of pom algae can kind of grow out. But this is a cool little algae if you're looking for something of a different color. Um, it's bright red. It's pretty cool. Obviously, you're not going to see it all the time if it's in your refugium. But if you're looking to do something different with Chaeto or you've struggled with keeping Chaeto, it's always cool, to try something different. Pom algae is really hardy, but it's a really good grower as well. So it's going to do a great job in your refugium.
Yeah, that's one thing that I need to work on, I guess, in my sump is trying out the tumble, making it tumble,
Yeah,
because you can do it that way, and what that does is it kind of keeps like the debris and detritus and stuff from
keeps it all
forming on
stirred
it. It
up.
keeps it moving,
Yep.
because you can grow it like, let's see, I have a picture here. You can grow it like this as well. Like you
Yeah.
notice in my sump, I have a bunch of live rock in there, and I have the Chaeto algae kind of just in there, but you want to make sure that you're like cutting it back, that you're pruning it,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
that you're flipping it over too every so often, because it can just be this big like mass of algae, and it
Yep,
could be just full of stuff that you don't want to build up in your tank.
absolutely.
So, but yeah, all these photos I got from Top Shelf. So
Yeah.
shout out Top Shelf. These are their macro photo, or yeah, their photos. Don't get mad at us for using them. Um, but
Dragon's
this
breath.
one's
That's
really
cool.
cool. Dragon's Breath. This is one
Yep.
that I've years ago always wanted to get. I think I might have picked up one piece of it years ago, but yeah, this is a really cool one.
Yeah, so this is Helmenia algae. It's really cool, and this will actually fluoresce under blue lights, which a lot of people like. And this is probably one of the more common algae you'll actually see at like frag swaps and stuff, just for that reason, because it's going to fluoresce under blue lights. It looks amazing, and a lot of people like I've seen people use this in their refugium. In fact, Top Shelf in their farm, I've been to their farm a couple times. They grow it in their refugiums actually, so they use that for nutrient export. They tumble this as well. That way, it's just constantly growing on all different angles. But this is also a cool one if you're looking to kind of get into making a macroalgae display or a little nano tank with some macroalgae. This is also a cool one to kind of start growing. It's just a unique algae, and it's really cool, especially under blue lights that it fluoresces. I think that's a really cool factor to this specific species. So it's relatively common. I feel like you could find it pretty much anywhere if you look it up, or even at your local fish store, they might be growing it as well. But yeah, it's a super cool algae, and probably one of my favorites personally.
Yeah, and this is one that you mentioned that's more like You can use it in a sump, but it's
Yeah,
one that is
it's
more
definitely
decorative
more
often.
decorative
Yeah,
algae, in my opinion.
for sure. And then the next one we have is definitely the most common, I would say, that's used a lot,
Yep.
and that's Chaetomorpha algae. This stuff is like balls of spaghetti
Yes.
in your tank.
Yeah, and this is probably the most common macroalgae used in aquariums, if I'm honest. It's just the most probably readily available. I think you could probably go to almost any fish store and they'll have some Jada laying around in a sump or something.
Mm.
So I definitely, and it's a great algae. I mean, it's really hardy. It does really good. It grows really fast. Like I always used to when I was growing, I'd like if my friends needed some, I'd have so much in my sump, I could be like, hey, like here's a handful of algae to start you off. So I
Yeah,
mean, it's always a good algae to have. And I mean, it might even get to the point where you have no room for it and you have to toss it out, like because you just got so much of it. But yeah, I mean, it's great algae. It does really good in refugiums, tumbling or not tumbling. It does really good. So I would definitely recommend that if you haven't kept any macroalgae before in your refugium and you're looking to try to start removing some of the excess nutrients, this is a good one to start with.
yeah, for sure. Super easy to maintain. When getting macroalgae, like from your local fish store or from a friend, is there anything that you should be wary of or careful about when picking some of these up for your tank?
So personally, if I ever buy a macroalgae or even when I'm out collecting macroalgae out in the ocean, if I take any home, I always try to take a really good look at the algae. And obviously, you're not always going to catch everything, but they can come with like slugs and stuff that'll eat the algae, or even
Mm.
snails or other different pests like bristleworms, etc. So, if you're getting some algae from a friend, always or even a store, just kind of look at it real good. You can rinse it off too, even under fresh water. Just give it a good rinse. I mean, it'll be fine. But
Yeah,
yeah, I definitely rinse it off and take a really good look at it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you never know what little tiny sea critters you're going to find on there
Yeah, you never know.
or any pests. Yeah, and you don't want to introduce pests in your tank.
No, no way.
Um, so you also have some videos that you brought today.
Yeah,
Do you want to go ahead and jump into those?
yeah. So I'll hop onto these. And one quick second, Joey. There's
Yeah.
a really cool algae that I should have sent you. It's called blue hypnea algae. Blue
Oh, yes.
hypnea. If you could pull that up somehow, I'll talk about the videos and maybe if you can find that a picture, that'd be freaking awesome. I
So
can jump on the videos if you want to look or whatever. It's fine.
cool. Yeah, if you want to jump into the videos, I will
Yep,
find you a photo of that one
sounds
for
good.
sure.
All right, so I got a couple videos here that I sent Joey. These are some footage that I've taken, like diving in the local waters here in Florida. This is Caulerpa, this great Caulerpa, racemosa. It's pretty common in the hobby. It's unique. It literally you can tell why it's called Great Caulerpa because of the way it grows. It looks like a bunch of green grapes. This is very hardy and it grows super fast, but this is one specifically that I would definitely recommend making sure that you watch because it can and will go sexual in your aquarium. I've had it like take over a whole half of my aquarium before because it takes off really quick and all of a sudden it just literally goes sexual and you have a big problem on your hands. So I've learned the more you kind of like prune them and keep up with like just keeping a small area of it, it does a lot better. But once you let it get super large and any little change to your parameters can just throw it off and make it go sexual. So you just got to be really careful with these because that'll affect your whole tank if that ever happens. So just keep that in mind. We got a couple other videos up here too. Hop to the next one in a second. So this is another cool and very common macroalgae in the aquarium trade. This is sea lettuce. If you can see in the kind of the top and then the right corner there. It's very common. This is one a lot of people actually grow and use to feed their like tangs in their aquarium. Yeah, so one last thing about this, it's great in refugiums too. You can use it in refugiums. I tend to tumble this algae if you keep it in your refugium, but it also works great. Like I said, for feed. If you have tangs and you want to keep something in your refugium and have a constant food source for your tangs, this is a great algae to use. So I definitely recommend doing that if you're interested in it. It's very easy to grow. Give it a try, and it's very common, so you should be able to find it at a local fish store or someplace online. Now we'll jump over to the next slide here. We got a really cool video here. Trying to see what we got. So this is codium up on the top there, and then you got a little star coral here as well. But the codium is known as dead man's fingers. Man, this is a rough video. But it's a dead man's fingers. It's a really thick macroalgae. Grows kind of like in finger-like structure. Super cool. It's more for like a decorative use. I've never seen people use this in a refugium, but it's a cool algae to use when you're setting up a macroalgae display. It looks really good in there. So this is another common algae, feather caulerpa. Now it's probably one of the most common caulerpas. It's very fast growing, but the same with the grape caulerpa. Once it gets really large and huge, it can tend to go sexual at any random change in parameters or something happens in your system that it doesn't like. It can go sexual and wreak havoc on your tank. So like I said, I always try to keep it like well pruned because this can get out of hand very quick. It grows really fast. So you just got to be very careful when keeping caulerpa. But I know a lot of people that keep it just fine. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for a different macroalgae to add to your system. But like I said earlier in this podcast, I definitely do not recommend using caulerpa in your refugiums. I just don't think it's the greatest ideas, just simply because it can go sexual and pretty much spoil your whole tank.
All right, cool. So those are some really awesome macroalgae that you brought to the table. I found that picture for you, by the way.
Okay, sweet.
So here is that. This is actually a photo from our friend Ken over with Hydrospace. He wrote an article about this, and I'm disconnecting again, but go for it.
Yeah. So this is definitely one I wanted to highlight. It's probably one of the most sought after macroalgae in the hobby, probably right now, in my opinion. It's blue hypnea algae. Now it's a beautiful, beautiful algae. Super. It's like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like highlighter blue. Unfortunately, it doesn't look great under white or not white lights, blue lights. But for anyone keeping a macroalgae display, this is like the holy grail of algae. It's beautiful. It's bright, bright blue. It looks amazing. And realistically speaking, blue is like one of the rarest colors in nature. So it's always cool to have something blue in your aquarium. And this is definitely, if you're looking to add blue to your reef, or not your reef, your macroalgae tank, this is definitely one I would recommend adding if you can. Now it can be hard to get a hold of, but I've seen them at a few sites. I know Algae Barn's had it before. Seahorse Savvy and multiple others have it from time to time. It can be hard to get your hands on, but if you're able to and you have a tank for it, I definitely recommend getting your hands on one of these specimens. It's beautiful. It's a relatively slow grower for most people, but once you get it settled in and going nice, it's a great addition to your macroalgae display.
Super cool. Yeah, like you said, with the blue lights on, it's probably just going to disappear in the tank, sort of.
Yeah.
Everything's going to be blue. But yeah, really cool algae. Thanks for bringing that to the table today. And I also found, while I was popping in and out here, I also found a picture of that mason jar tank.
Ooh.
With the caulerpa that ran rapid in it. So let me see how I can share that real quick here. So there it is right there.
Nice.
That's me trying to clean it up. But look how much is in there. Look at that.
That's crazy.
It took over like the whole thing.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a 1 gallon mason jar that you can pick up, like a drink dispenser. You can pick that up at Walmart.
Yeah, so I was at Target the other day and I saw one of these on the shelf and I was thinking, I'm like, man, that'd be cool. Like you just turn the valve on for a water change and drain it down. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. So if you look there behind the spigot, there is PVC pipe.
Yeah.
So I basically ran a PVC pipe to it so that the top of the PVC acted as the overflow.
Yep.
And then I just turned on the spigot to change the water.
That's really cool.
And it works really well too. Nice. It was just that
I might have to do that at some point. That'd be a really cool build.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do it again. It's just finding out where to put it and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I know how that is. Did you? So, did you light it or do you natural light? How did you do that?
yeah, so I put one of those what is it? It's like an aqua blue LED lamp.
Okay.
You can find them on Amazon. I think they're like $30.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, just put that into one of those like work lamps.
Yeah.
Just screwed it up in there, and then that was the lighting for the tank.
Nice. Okay.
It had a few LPS corals at one time. It had some zoanthid corals in there.
Nice.
But yeah, I put the macroalgae in there to help with the water quality because it was so small.
Yeah, it just took off.
And yeah, that color but just took off, man. Just took off. So
Yep.
yeah, definitely be careful with what algae you choose.
Yes.
I would say if you're looking for using algae for nutrient export, improving your water quality, and all the list of 5 things that we talked about, outside of decorative, I would choose Chaeto algae
Definitely.
for your sump. And there's a hot debate amongst hobbyists. Is it Chaeto or Chaeto? And I came across this right here, so I'm going to throw it out there. If you want to leave a comment down below or send me an email about it, let me know. But Chaeto, Chaetomorpha is typically pronounced as Chaetomorpha. So the CH in Chaeto is pronounced with a hard K sound, similar to kite or key, rather than the ch sound like in cheese. So
It's like a silent H.
yeah.
Katie.
And it's also, let's see, what am I doing here? Remove that. There we are. So it's also like the origin of the word too.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
where it comes from and how they pronounce this the CH, because CH changes, like in champagne, it's more of
Yeah.
like a SH, but it's
Yeah.
spelled with a CH.
That's true.
So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. How do you say Chaeto algae? Do you say Chaeto or Chaeto?
Chaeto.
There you go. So I hope you found this episode educational. I hope you learned something. Let us know in the comments below, what's your favorite macroalgae? What type of algae do you use in your system? And if you like this video, YouTube's going to recommend this video for you to watch or listen to next. Let me know in the comments if you've enjoyed it. And we'll see you in the next one.
See ya.